Welcome back to From Pain to Gain. We are resuming the Beatitude Bar series. Let's jump in. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. To be pure in heart is to have a single-minded devotion to seek God and yield to his ways. I got my good associate, bro, BFFFFF, Jason Montoya here.
Hola.
Would you like to expand on those words?
Yeah, so blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. That's the Christian Standard Bible. The Message says, "You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world." And that one kind of has an interesting overlay to the direction from Jesus about take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your neighbor's eye.
Hmm.
And the idea here is get your inside world, your mind and our hearts, get those right. And when we get those right and healed and fixed, we'll be able to see God and we'll be able to see him in the world around us. And there's a passage, quote from Oswald Chambers that kind of taps into this, and it just helps us understand, like, when someone sees God as like a really bad or evil person or horrible, or they just see the world in a very dark and nihilistic way, it may have to do with their mind and heart that may need healing.
Hmm.
And so Oswald Chambers has this quote that I really resonated with, which is, he says, an intellectual conception of God may be found in a bad, vicious character. The knowledge and vision of God is dependent entirely on a pure heart. Character determines the revelation of God to the individual. The pure in heart see God. So the way in which we look at God or describe him or understand him is actually a mirror or a projection or a reflection of our heart. And it's a good way to go, okay, this is where my heart is. This is where someone else's heart is. And I think what's interesting about this is, if for those of us who have never drinking lots and lots of salt water in the ocean, what happens is when you drink salt water, you start to become delusional and everything becomes, you start to hallucinate and you see the world completely distorted in a completely distorted way. And I think that's how this works, is the unpure heart, which is all of us. We have unpure hearts and the world corrupts us and we become more and more corrupt. And so as we become more corrupt, we see the world in a more and more distorted way. And it's really this false mirage or illusion, depending on how you want to frame it. And what God's saying is you can't see him when you see the world in a distorted way like that.
Hmm.
And but at the same time, we can't actually save ourselves. We can't fix that problem. That's where Christ is necessary. His work on the cross, his atoning work, essentially washes over us and begins to undo that corruption. So we go from an unpure heart to a pure heart. And so the kind of a simple way to think about this is we can place our faith ultimately in tragedy and in the darkness and in suffering, and that's what life is about, and we move towards that and we inflict that on others. Or we can have faith and redemption, which it still acknowledges that tragedy is there and exists, but that God is working it out of us. He's purging that tragedy out of us so that we don't become agents of tragedy, but instead become agents of redemption. Does that make sense?
Of course, and that's why I think it was over 80%, maybe six, I'll just say 60, 80% of children that grow up in a fatherless household or an abusive
Mm-hmm.
father household ends up in crime of some sort. It's
Mm-hmm.
because they're kind of acting out that rebellion, that or that indignance, the resentment
Mm-hmm.
towards their father, kind of the head of the household, right? As we know.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think what I would say to that is for people to recognize that we are all dormant criminals. We just haven't, a lot of us haven't been put in the situation where we would
oh,
become
I'm
that.
active. I just robbed the bank this
Oh,
morning.
you're an active one. Um, but I think it's just an important acknowledgement, because we can say, well, I am not a criminal and this person is. We can say I am better than them, but we're no better. In fact, they may be better than us in some ways because we just haven't been put it through the ringer in the way they have. So, I mean, we all make our choices in those contexts too. So that's part of it. but we also are creatures of our environments. So
Yeah. And there's some element of escapism,
yeah,
which some people could argue is touching into the subconscious. If you're a child like me, where you want to escape from all the verbal abuse, all of the neglect, the emotional trauma, then that escapism becomes the vehicle for regular life. So that's like a subconscious element, I would say. So things that we can't even be aware of necessarily because it's been a part of us so long.
yeah,
Yeah. So that takes some intentional work to get through. In terms of purity of heart, I decided to Google for this one. Why is it difficult to hear God in the midst of sin? And this was an interesting answer connected to pride. For example, if somebody says, I don't really need God, this sort of sin will hinder the hearing of God's voice every time. When we are in sin, whether pride, immorality, unbelief, the only thing we will hear is the conviction of God. But if we do not deal with our sin, our ears will become more and more deaf to God's voice.
mm,
Disobedience always blocks us from hearing more from God other than conviction. In His mercy, He does not let us bypass our sin and begin to speak to us about other things.
yeah.
Deal with your sin, walk in obedience, and begin to hear God's voice clearly. That's from stepstudyteach.com.
Mm.
So that is a interesting connection to our beatitude here today about purity in heart. But we could go ahead and stagger on the opposite side to Trump. Let's start with him today. Um, Purity in heart. I mean, again, a pretty obvious answer here. He is unrepentant, openly prideful. When he heard about how the news about grabbing women's thingies was going to be released, his first response was, well, women will probably hate it, but men will probably be cool with it. Not even acknowledging that this is disgusting behavior. It was, and then of course we're going into the affair situation that happened earlier this year, the coming to light through a court, um, through years of that. We and he keeps on repeating that this is President Biden trying to use the judicial system against him, but there's no evidence of that too. So he's using deception to also drive people to him. That was actually started even before the last campaign, that court case. So yeah, there's lots of
Yeah, and that
things.
yeah, there's this idea of Machiavellism, which is essentially the ends justify the means. So I can essentially, well, my if you have a certain outcome you're trying to accomplish, if I need to lie, it's okay to lie because the outcome I'm seeking, that's what I have to do to create that outcome. And so there's no, it's kind of a moral relativism that he's embraced. And so as I've kind of reflected on that and dove deep into it, I said, well, Trump, like, for example, he lies about the 2020 election. He says he won it by a large margin, which he did not. Biden won that election. But yet he continues to lie about it. And what becomes clear about it is that it doesn't really matter what's true. And I think one of the things that I have such a strong reaction to Trump about is his contempt for truth. He doesn't care about it, doesn't value it. He values himself and other things over truth. And so what I also realized is that his willingness to lie to deceive masses and masses of people is because he has a dark and deep faith in tragedy. He recognizes that this world and this life is tragic. And what he's doing is he's going to leverage that tragedy for personal gain. So there's going to be someone that steals from you. Let it be me. I'll be the guy that steals from you. I'm going to take advantage. That's sort of how he sees it. And so he operates that way where he's gonna leverage the levers of power to create or to pretend there's a tragedy, and then he's going to leverage that tragedy to exploit his supporters and those that are casualties along the way. And it's just such a stark contrast. As a Christian, it's such a one of the deep reasons that I won't support him, and why I support Harris instead is because she does advocate for the helpless, those that are not in power, those that are not in her own tribe, that are not Democrats, that are Republicans. She's trying to be a leader for all Americans, not just those that are loyal to her. And
Hmm.
so that kind of contrast between faith and tragedy versus faith and redemption, the difference between a corrupt soul, corrupt heart versus a pure in heart. And the way for Trump to go forward is to repent. Like, it's to make things right for the people he's harmed. And if he walks that path, which he can, and he always has that choice of redemption,
Yeah.
as do his followers and his supporters and the leaders in the Republican Party. They all have that choice every day. Um, like Zacchaeus with Jesus, to go, you know what? I took advantage of all these people. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to pay them back fourfold. I'm going to make things right, and I'm going to follow Jesus. And that's something that we all have a choice to do every day.
Indeed. Um, there's a couple things that came up. Number one, we all know who the author of confusion is. Um, and this is where it's kind of referenced in 1 Corinthians 14:33. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints. Um, so being that deception is the number one way to confuse somebody.
It's a
Uh,
rip. I think of it like a riptide
mm,
of confusion. Yeah.
yeah, it just keeps on hitting people, waves
And
and
you,
waves of it.
and fighting it just makes it worse in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Um, one of the other examples of confusion that I've seen not only Trump uh, create and permeate, because I see things like Fox News do it, is this concept that climate change is fake and it's just an illusion, or even worse, there's some people, even church leader, unfortunately, I've heard this, that why does it even matter if the rapture's coming? I'm like, for that last one, I have a special problem with, because in Genesis, God instructs Adam and Eve to take care of Eden, which is essentially like a analogy to Earth. And so if you're just plummeting the Earth as much as you can because you don't care, and
Mhm.
you're just going to leave this place anyways, it's a it's not a
It's a
it's
pillaging mindset,
it's a
which,
beyond
yeah,
lukewarm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's we are called to be stewards,
Yeah,
and the character we develop in this life translates into the next life.
yeah. And if you
Yeah.
think about, who does that benefit when you say climate change is an illusion? It's very easy to see who's driving that message. It's these coal company owners, the oil company owners, which are already making trillions of dollars, and they want to keep on making that. So they're not looking out for God's interests. They're not looking out for the little guy
Yeah.
who's struggling, and their future generations will struggle with smog and lack of energy resources. It's just disgusting.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is like, we're Christians. We should be called to steward the earth. We should be the leaders in how to steward the earth. We shouldn't be fighting it.
Yeah,
Um, and instead I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of our own sin and our own complacency and not wanting to change. But we should be leading the way. And if you lead the way, you have a lot more sway on how things are done. So if you don't, then you've given up all your power. So
yeah,
why not be a collaborator in learning how to steward the earth, so that it's just in the way that we utilize its resources is in a sustainable way
exactly.
versus exploitative. So yeah.
Yeah. So let's jump over to Kamala. How does she express this beatitude?
Um, So yeah, that's an interesting one because it when you're talking about the inside world of someone, your heart and your mind. I mean, we can look at whether it's Trump or her and look at the sort of the fruit of that
Mhm.
tree,
Yeah,
but you don't
something
necessarily
that
know what's inside of the tree, you know? It's hard to know. So you got to look at the fruit.
yeah, something that stood out to me fruit wise was when she did her acceptance speech at the DNC. The first thing she said was happy anniversary to her husband.
Mm,
And to me, I just got goosebumps thinking about that because it shows the priority of marriage to her.
yeah.
She could
Mm,
have done everything else. Like it's about her, that moment. But
yeah. She made
she,
it about someone else.
yeah, and they're together, they're unity, right? Which is exactly
Hmm.
what God wants
Mm,
us to be
yeah.
doing.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, there are some um, people could argue that, especially the abortion matter, that them being at the DNC was a really poor idea, decision making wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there's, it's just such a gigantic dynamic situation when it comes to abortion. To just remove it from people and track them is not a good idea either, and it's not sustainable. And like we've touched on this matter before, banning abortions does not stop them from occurring more gruesomely. So we have to create a sustainable, wide-ranging circle of a plan to have babies, which is she
Hmm.
and Tim Waltz have been talking about creating more child tax credits, which have reduced abortions and help people with
Childhood
more
poverty.
security.
Chi
Yeah.
People don't may not realize it. If you eliminate childhood poverty, if you financially help mothers in poverty, abortions go down, right?
Mhm.
And so, and that's just one simple example, but there are a lot of things we could be doing to eliminate abortions that don't involve making it illegal or not, or we can have no abortions and it's not be illegal. So I think what people get fixated is on the legality of it, and this goes to the law that we've talked about before, which is the law has a limit. You got to have hearts and minds beyond that. And what I love about the early church is and their purity in heart was the early church didn't have access to Bibles like as we do. I mean, they might have had fragments of letters from somebody, here or there, but they just lived out their faith. And so there wasn't anything in the Roman Empire, there was a practice called infanticide, and people would leave their babies by the river and let the rivers kill the babies. And the Christians saw this and they just said, this is a problem. We're going to go solve it. And they just went and started rescuing the babies and they raised them. They raised them as their own kids. And so they didn't wait for someone to say, well, it was a sin or not a sin. They didn't wait for the government to pass a law that you shouldn't do it. They just literally went and started saving babies. And so this is one of the issues that I have with a lot of people that kind of, advocate for the banning of abortion is like, well, what are you doing to solve the problem? Like what babies are you saving in your neighborhood, in your community, in your city? What are you doing to actually solve the problem versus I've also talked to a lot of people where what they say is, well, I just want to make it illegal so I can move on with my life. Like they don't
Mhm.
actually want to solve the problem. They just want to feel good. And so they want that feeling versus solving the problem. And for me, it's about actually eliminating it as something that happens. And so to do that, it's complex and there's a lot of dynamics you have to deal with, and you have to get a lot of agreement. And we can regress just as much as we can progress. That makes
Yeah,
sense. So,
for sure. To draw it into a technology perspective, because a lot of you may not know, I used to build websites for a living. And one website I worked on was PGA.com. And what you see, for example, on a golf professional, one of these guys that trains you to do golf at one of these local golf courses, you see this gentleman, John Smith, but you didn't look into the back end. Like, I think that's what we're looking at when we come to the abortion matter. You're just seeing the John Smith name. You're seeing, oh, in this case, this person aborted a baby and they're evil and they need to be stopped. But what you're not seeing on the technology side from this website perspective is that 30,000 golf professionals, trainer guys were imported every single night into the system. And 10,000 golf courses were updated that same night also. And this happens on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And you have all these databases involved that are intertwined with each other. They're merged to bring all these data points together. There's all
Yeah.
these dynamics going on the back end.
Hmm.
That's similar to this abortion matter. We're just looking at the front, and we're just not even considering the back
Yeah.
and all the dynamics there.
Yeah. And I think if we care about the issue, we'll approach it in a way that leads to it to winning hearts and minds, to making progress. And a lot of the Republican Party is taking the approach that is actually making the problem worse. And the way I look at it is a vote for Trump is actually a vote for more abortions.
Mm.
So
And what else about Kamala in terms of purity of heart?
um
Mm. I guess she's not afraid to bring up the conviction of sin when it comes to her opponent. She openly talks about all his downfalls or missing the mark.
yeah.
And if you have somebody in your life too that calls you out on sin, it may not be pretty sometimes, but sometimes we need to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. If we're mature, we'll, even if they say it in the wrong way, we'll at least be willing to hear it and consider
Yeah.
it. And look in the mirror and reflect on it and go, okay, maybe I am off here. Um,
Mm.
and sometimes, it may just be someone projecting their own stuff on us, vomiting on
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Or it's usually probably a combination of those things. But yeah,
Can
I
you
think
elaborate for somebody that may not understand projection? Maybe an example.
yeah, look, so let's say I'm feeling hateful towards a particular group. I might say, Ivan, you're being so hateful towards this group. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking my own hate and I'm putting it on you. You're the one that's being hateful. When in reality, it's me being hateful, and I'm just trying to get rid of that feeling, or trying to suppress it so I don't have to feel bad. And so if I put it on you, then I don't have to feel bad. So
Yeah.
projection is just, you know, it might be like my own, we all have our vices and our own sins that we struggle with. And so I might go, well, maybe I struggle with stealing things. And so I say, well, Ivan's probably going to steal. If we invite him to our house, he's going to steal something. So I'm projecting onto you something that I might do, but it may have nothing to do with you. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Or an adulterous husband that is
Yeah.
carrying on adultery and then decides, I'm going to start to keep an eye on my wife because of my behavior, right? It's a subconscious, like,
Yeah.
oh, she must be doing this because I'm doing it. It's like,
Yeah.
then they become
So it's kind of like,
overprotective.
yeah, and there's a lot of examples, and that's a big issue with the Republican Party is they just are there's so much sin and deception there that they're projecting a lot of it. Every accusation is a confession, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we just grieve for a second about how something we talked about over the phone yesterday, or no, 2 days ago, was all of these Republicans are more than likely bending the knee to Trump, not because they like him or even think he's right, or even the right candidate. They just bend the knee because they just want to hold on to their power seats in the House of Representatives or the senatorship.
Yeah, I think it's different for different people, but yeah, a lot of them don't want to lose their job. Maybe their identity's tied up into it. It could be a little bit more complex than literally they want the power, but it could be their identity. It could
Mm,
be there could just be a variety of factors at play. It could be income, providing for their family,
hmm.
being a father that provides for and a husband that provides for their family. So identity, I think, is a big part of it. And Trump exploits identity issues to get people to support him, or to villainize those that he doesn't like, or that his supporters don't like. And so there is a dynamic there of like kind of a mutual, there's a transactional nature, which, transactions can be fine, but um, when the values that matter become subordinate to the transaction, then it's a problem.
Hmm.
And so if you can't tell the truth, if the truth is less important than keeping your position of power, then you are succumbing to and compromising on your morality and your virtue for power, which is just going to corrupt you and make you more likely to go along with someone like Trump. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's dominated them. He ran in the 2016 primary and he won, and he beat them all. And a lot of them, a lot of the leaders, like a lot of Lindsey Graham and a lot of them, what they'll say is, well, Trump beat me. The people maybe know something I don't. And so I have to submit to him. Like it's like they've abdicated because they've been defeated. And so they go along. And that's a really sad and tragic dynamic, because essentially Trump has dominated and taken over the Republican Party. And now it's a matter of whether or not he's going to do the same with America as a whole.
Yeah, such a big tragedy. I have a big feeling that if he loses, that a lot of Republicans are just going to have a big sigh of relief. Like, thank God that nightmare is over.
Yeah. A lot of them are. And I think a lot of them are secretly hoping he loses.
Yeah.
And but in another sense, they've been corrupted and they're being cowardly. And so they're gonna have to sort that out, and they are gonna have to transform, and their corrupt hearts are gonna have to be made pure, because and I can relate to that. I went through my own journey and down that dark abyss, and I had to come back through my own journey. And part of that was that reconciliation and repentance tour that I did, that I mentioned before. And so God can sanctify and transform us from the bottom of the abyss. But yeah, it's got to happen. And I think we're going to hear a lot of those stories in 5 or 10 years of regrets and transformation. And the sooner we can transition to that season, the better.
Yeah. Another uh, thing or concept that Trump is pushing is something that I believe Socrates mentioned as a danger to democracy, which is the concept of mobocracy. So if you have enough angry people,
Oh,
you could
okay.
have a um, authoritarian rule just based on oppression. If you have
Yeah.
enough people that are angry, they could be in leadership, and that's not necessarily like what we have. Like that's
Yeah.
what we have now. Hopefully, we maintain it as democracy. But if you have enough angry people,
Yeah,
they
you can have a domination-based paradigm where the victim is actually at the bottom of the hierarchy and essentially oppressed. The victims are oppressed, and the hierarchy is built from that oppression.
yeah
Like you saw in America in the South with slavery, that would be an example of that. But it's and it's a scary thing, and that's kind of what lawless populism is aiming for. Is they don't want to be restrained by laws. They want to be able to do whatever they want. And that comes down to the leader, the populist demagogue, who wants to be able to do what he wants and not have any criminal accountability for his actions. So
yeah. I got to dig into that deeper. We should make
yeah.
a separate episode on Mavok.
But I think that's a good way to wrap it up. We can
Yeah,
transition to peacemakers.
let's do it. Excuse me. All right, this has been another episode of the Beatitude Bar series. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. We'll see you in the next one for the seventh Beatitude.